I'm glad I've assisted a sense of equality in the debate that's going on this afternoon. This is obviously a vital debate, and I think my friend and member for Walsall was quite correct to point out the historical connotations of it and Britain's historical involvement in the region. We tend to delude ourselves quite often in this House that Britain is seen around the world as a benign liberal democracy that never works out of self-interest but only out of the greater good of mankind as a whole, and we seek to promote the rule of law, democracy and independence throughout the world. Sadly, the history of Britain's involvement in North Africa and the Middle East hardly adds to that. The coup that took place in Iran in 1952, with all the ramifications that have come from that, the Suez operation in 1956, the US bombing of Libya in 1986 when the planes took off from this country, and the obsessive dealing in arms in exchange for oil, and turning a blind eye to volumes and volumes of human rights abuses in countries that we claim to be very close friends of this one. And so I was very disappointed when I tabled what I thought was a perfectly innocuous and reasonable question last week to the Secretary of State, saying would he tell me on what occasion since June of last year the issues of human rights have been raised with Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, Libya, Egypt, Yemen, Saudi Arabia and Bahrain. I was told that the Minister will answer shortly. Well, I hope he can answer shortly, and I will give way to him immediately now so he can give me the answer.
Mr. Speaker, with permission, I won't give the answer quite now. I signed off that question this morning, so I know it's in my mind. I will make sure the text is available to me later for the wind-up to make one or two references to it. But the honourable gentleman can be assured it's a very good and complete answer, and it is very much on its way to him.
I would expect nothing less, but I would love to have had it before the debate so that I could have referred to it. That's why I tabled the question. But thank you to the Backbench Business Committee for getting the debate in the first place. So I asked the question, we need to have a complete reappraisal of our policy towards the whole region. We cannot go on supporting potentates and dictators, absolute monarchs, abusers of human rights, sell arms, sell tear gas, sell riot shields, sell all kinds of weapons of destruction of some sort, and then not be surprised when they're used. As my friend pointed out, the sale of arms to Libya. Who on earth was supposed to be attacking Libya that they required all this vast array of armoury? Any more than Saudi Arabia or other places. And so I just think we need to think quite carefully about that. And at the Libyan Arms Fair in 2008, and I'm quoting from an article in the Guardian Online, that NMS took up 50 British companies to the arms fair in Libya in 2008, and last November, the last exhibition reportedly showcased military wares such as artillery systems, anti-tank weapons and infantry weapons. All of those are now being used as we speak. And then on the question of arms sales itself, the Campaign Against the Arms Trade reports that in 2011 UK weapons used against pro-democracy protesters in the Middle East, and then goes on to point out the UK sold tear gas, crowd control equipment, armaments, sniper rifles to Libya and Bahrain in 2010, being used as we speak against protesters there. And David Cameron, or the Prime Minister, rather bizarrely, took a series of arms salespersons with him on his trip recently, and only a year before that we were selling equipment to Saudi Arabia that is being used at the present time in Bahrain, and so the list goes on and on. We cannot keep on assuming that none of this is anything to do with us, and I think it's time that we change policy completely on arms sales and stop having an economy that is apparently so dependent on the sale of arms to so many people around the world. You cannot sell arms and then complain about human rights abuses when they're used against the people that suffer from that. Now, there are many, many issues that could be raised in this debate, and I regret that I only have 10 minutes, very briefly, because I've had my 2 minutes injury time.
But I've been very... Moving on from arms, the Foreign Secretary on the 17th of February said, and I quote, "The UK would strongly oppose any interference in the affairs of Bahrain by other nations." Is he aware of any statement from the Foreign Office calling on the Saudis immediately to withdraw their invasion force?
not aware of any such statement, and I wish there was such a statement, because the Gulf Cooperation Council sending forces into Bahrain is an invasion, is an occupation, and is resulting in a great deal of oppression of people in Bahrain at the present time. So what I want to mention is three other specific issues. Palestine has been raised on a number of occasions, and last weekend I was at a conference dealing with issues surrounding Palestinian prisoners, and there are issues surrounding, many issues surrounding Palestine. But if I could just refer to an astonishing fact that since 1967, Israeli occupation forces have arrested more than 800,000 Palestinian prisoners, and that at the present time there are thought to be 6,600 Palestinians in Israeli prisons, including children, including elected members of the Palestinian National Authority, including a number who are in isolation, and at least 1,000 who are deprived of any kind of family visit. Those are abuses of the human rights of those individuals. Add that to the construction of the wall, add that to the settlement policy, add that to the checkpoints, add that to the imprisonment of the people of Gaza, add that to the huge levels of unemployment resulting in Gaza, and add that to the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians living in the Negev desert, add that to the removal of Israeli-Palestinian homes in Haifa and in Jaffa. Add all that up, and what you get and see is a constant harassment of all of the Palestinian people. And so I would hope that if we are serious about human rights, and Israel has been building the wall, continuing the settlements in defiance of, no, I won't, in defiance of all international law and all pressures to the contrary, then where are the condemnations? Where are the sanctions? Where is the discussion publicly by the West about Israel's behaviour and its policy? I don't want any bombing. I don't want any assassinations. I don't want any murders or killings. But you see a whole process of hate developing because there is no condemnation of what is being done, which is so damaging to the Palestinian people. I only have 4 minutes left, and there's a couple of other issues I wanted to raise. One that hasn't been raised so far in this debate is that of the situation in Morocco, or the Moroccan occupation of the Western Sahara, or the several hundred thousand Sahrawi people that have been in refugee camps in Algeria since 1975. I hope that one day the UN, MINURSO, will take on a human rights role for itself, as I think it should have, but that also the UN will succeed in carrying out the decolonisation statutes, which should give the people of the Western Sahara a right to decide their own self-determination. Imagine what it's like having spent, we're now in the third generation of residents of those refugee camps in Algeria, hoping one day to be able to go home. And it's not good enough for Morocco to say, well, there can be a degree of autonomy within the Western Sahara. Under international law, it's absolutely clear that a former Spanish colony, which is what the Western Sahara is, should, on the removal of the colonial power, have a right of self-determination. That right has been denied to the Sahrawi people. It's a sore that runs through their feelings, it's a sore that runs through the whole region, and again, can be the start of a problem for the future. I'm well aware the Minister has some sympathies with the views that I'm expressing here. We had a very useful meeting with him from the Western Sahara group, and I hope that in his reply he'll be able to give us some further news on this. 3 weeks ago, I was on a short visit to Tunisia, and I spent a lot of time talking to people of all sorts of political persuasions, the left, the centre, a number of Islamic groups and others. And what was very clear was that they were delighted to remove the removal of the President Ben Ali. They were frightened of the return of the Ben Ali regime in a different guise, through the power of the security services, through the power of patronage in the state, and they were frightened of what may well happen in the future. I was talking to some students who were in the central square who were very effectively kettling a group of army officers and soldiers and their equipment and their tanks. And it was a slightly bizarre experience to see a lot of students keeping the army in a square, because most demonstrations I've been on, if the army turns up, people generally think it's bad news. And they thought it was good news to keep the army there, and then they explained to me there was a vast array of European-supplied anti-riot equipment around the corner in the hands of the riot police, and they thought keeping the army in there would keep the police out, because the police probably wouldn't fire on the army. It was a perfectly logical choice to make. And so I then discussed with them what their hopes were for the future, and they were pretty diverse, to be quite honest. There wasn't a coherent central theme to what they wanted, except freedom of demonstration, freedom of assembly, freedom of expression, all those kind of things. And I said, do you want Western help? They said, no, because when the West comes in, it never leaves. It doesn't go. We want to do this ourselves, and we want to achieve something different ourselves. And so it's on that point that I'd like to just conclude my remarks. Amnesty International have sent out a very interesting briefing pointing out the abuses of human rights, the shooting of people that's gone on in so many countries: Tunisia, Algeria, Sudan, Egypt, Bahrain, Oman, Saudi Arabia. The list goes on, including, of course, Yemen and what is happening there at the present time. And there is a common theme to this. One is a thirst for peace and democracy, yes, but it's also an economic issue. So many of those countries have adopted economic policies that resulted in mass youth unemployment. It's the anger of young people who see no future and no security for themselves in an oppressive state that's been largely supported by the West. I think we need to think very carefully, express a great deal of hope about what is going on across the whole region, but intervention, military intervention, has brought problems in every place we've been in the past, and I understand all the arguments for a no-fly zone over Libya, but I don't see how it's going to do anything other than exacerbate what is already a very tense situation.